Unemployed and Afraid acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this episode on and of the land where you, the listener, are tuning in from. We would like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and extend our respect to any First Nations, Aboriginal, and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, acknowledging that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid, a podcast that explores the messy middle of being out on your own and starting over with the people who've done it. I'm your host, Kim Curtin. Thank you for being here. Let's get into today's story of starting over. Hello, welcome back to another brilliantly inspiring story of starting over. How are you? How's your energy? Have you taken a moment for some self-care today, whatever that might look like for you? After recording this little intro, I'm going to go pop my headphones on for a lovely guided meditation and burn a little incense. And it's inspired by my guest today, who is all about bringing some much needed self-care to the people who need it. Her name is Leah, and she runs a store called Radical Self. And in this story today, we get to hear about Leah's journey of creating a brick and mortar store at a very young age, pivoting, becoming an influential human in the fight against fast fashion, her experience of fully embracing her radical self in coming out as queer, and now creating this space to allow people to connect to their own truest self. It's a journey that encapsulates all of my favorite things about going full force at life, career, and change. How a big dream at one age can be the thing that helps you achieve a totally different dream at another age. And all of the self-doubting moments that happen along the way that we do our very best to embrace, understand, and work through. There's just so much inspo to take away from my chat with this glorious human. So we're grateful to be able to bring it to you today. And if you love these stories and feel like they're bringing you a little something for your day, you know what to do. Just remember to drop us a review. Oh, it's a little fun rhyme. That's enjoyable. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. What a joy it is to introduce you to Leah Musch, Melbourne-based founder of the inclusive, pleasure-focused self-care brand Radical Self. Radical Self exists to serve people who have previously felt excluded from the wellness industry. Radical Self carefully curates and sells beautiful, eco-conscious products to encourage radical self-care. I'm talking crystal kits, organic tea, oracle cards, and sexual wellness and intimacy products that connect you with your sexuality, an integral part of self-care. It's an idea that has rattled in her head long before it was made real. An idea that formed after a big personal change period and launched during the final lockdown in Melbourne. Like most of us, Leah's journey with life and entrepreneurship has twists and turns. In fact, you might have even met Leah in her other journey, the unmaterial girl, as former fashion addict turned slow fashion activist. Leah, I can't wait to hear all about it. Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. I have you and your little puppy, which is such a joy. What a cute little fluff ball.
Yeah, he's very enthusiastic. He's channeling the energy of a 13-year-old boy today. So he's really testing me.
There's something to be said for that energy though, isn't it?
I know. He's so cute that he's easy to forgive, but he's a lot.
Well, if he gives us a little bit of a woof or a hello, we will excuse him. To kick us off, tell me, how would your best mate describe you?
I think my friends would probably describe me as passionate and creative, and I would maybe hope that they would say I'm kind as well.
That's a very nice way to be described. So tell me, before Radical Self, before the unmaterial girl, who were you?
Well, I guess the first kind of entrepreneurial thing that I ever did was opening my own shop when I was pretty young. So I opened a store in Brisbane's West End called The Happy Cabin, and I was 21 years old. So when all of my friends were kind of going to uni and traveling, I was just really hell-bent on having my own store. And so somehow, with the help of my parents, who I definitely couldn't have done this without, I managed to secure a small loan and I started this shop. And it was kind of in peak lumberjack chic, cute, forestry moment when like onesies were a thing and there was a lot of plaid and a lot of like cutesiness, and just the theme of the store was just really well timed. And it actually was open for about 10 years after I had started it, which is pretty good innings for a retail shop. So I'd say that I started, I guess, as a shopkeeper. I've always just kind of been a shopkeeper at heart. I just love creating spaces where I can interact with people.
Wow, what a challenge taking that on at 21 years old. I feel like I might have found a little kindred spirit here because my first, I haven't told this story on this podcast ever, but my first foray into entrepreneurship was a beauty salon at 18, which did not last 10 years. I'll give you the hot tip. So I can imagine it would have been pretty intense at that time. What were some of the learnings you can reflect back on?
It was extremely intense. I remember, I had so much energy. So I was open 6 days a week and I was basically the only employee for the first couple of years. And the parts that came really easily were the buying and the merchandising and the talking to people and creating the atmosphere of the shop. But I really struggled with the maths side of it, the accounting, the finances, all of that I found pretty intimidating. And I made sure that I hired a good accountant and I made sure that I had people who would fill the gaps in my own knowledge. But I still never felt super confident in those areas because it was something I didn't fully understand. So that was really hard, and just, I guess, the workload. But in a way, because I was working for myself, it never felt like work in the same way that having a 9-to-5 full-time job with somebody else feels like work. I think I worked way more hours, but because I loved it so much and I was having such a good time, it just kind of flowed.
Yeah, that's so relatable. I think that feeling of just the difference in working for yourself versus for somebody else. It's not easier. It's just, it hits different. It just feels more free.
Totally.
So what brought you to close the store down then after 10 years?
So it actually only closed earlier this year. So I owned the shop for the first 3 years. And after the first 3 years, to be honest, I kind of burnt myself out. I'd worked so much and I just kind of felt like I'd hit a bit of a ceiling as to where I was growing. And so I had some friends who had come to visit from overseas and they just fell in love with the shop, and somehow in a perfect twist of fate they decided to buy the store, and they ran it for the past 7 years and they did an incredible job. And I took the money from selling the shop and I decided to just go traveling and do something completely different. And I found this program in Rio where they were teaching young entrepreneurs like myself about social enterprises and how you can run a business and also help people. And that was something that really sparked my curiosity, because the Happy Cabin had been so brilliant, but it didn't feel like I was actually making that much of an impact. And so I went over to Rio, and this was right before the Olympics. So it was quite an intense time to be there. And I just learned all about social enterprise and how business can really help people. And I was just extremely inspired. And it was just a really eye-opening time overseas. And I came back to Australia and I had learned a lot about the fashion industry while I was there. Prior to that, I'd always known that there were bad things that were going on, but I'd really turned a blind eye. And having been over there, and I saw a lot about what was going on behind the curtain, and it just completely opened my eyes to what was happening in the fashion industry. And I decided to come back and start a blog and start talking about what I was learning about sustainable fashion.
So you came back and started this blog. Where did you get started with that? Did you have any intent with that at the time? Or you just sort of I just want to share things, or did you think commercial?
This was kind of when Instagram, in a way, there wasn't so much of an Instagram influencer culture. It was just before that. So what I was really using Instagram and then having my own blog for was I was just trying to actually kind of be an activist in the space. I really wanted to talk about what I'd seen, and I really wanted to wake people up to what was happening in the fashion industry. And this was kind of just before people started to really understand what fast fashion was and what slow fashion was and what upcycling was. This is at the perfect tipping point. And so I just really wanted to kind of wake people up to what was happening in a way that was also not judgmental, because I had been the biggest fast fashion consumer ever. And I had so much clothes, and it was mostly just sharing what I had learned, because I knew there were a lot of other people out there who were experiencing the same thing, or maybe didn't have the awareness. So
how nice to see, I guess, now the shift in that space and the awareness and the passion for, like I said, upcycling, shopping secondhand, making good choices and understanding production lines. It's very cool that you were at the top of the curve for that one.
Yeah, it was really perfect timing, because it was at a time when I actually had something to share, because it wasn't really part of the conversation yet. And I remember I had mixed reviews. I had a lot of people who maybe felt judged by what I was saying, or they didn't really think there was much of a problem. Whereas now there is just so much more awareness, which is why I've kind of toned down what I'm doing with Unmaterial Girl, because in a way, the energy for how I can impact people isn't so great there. I feel like people are really starting to get it. There's definitely still so much work to do, but now there are so many other voices in the space who have new things to say that I feel like it's okay for me to kind of step back.
How cool that you're able to recognize when there's a shift that's taking place in your life. Was Unmaterial Girl at that stage supporting you from a financial aspect, or are you balancing that with something else?
Yeah, so it was never something that I actually imagined getting into, but as I got further into blogging and making videos, and especially with Instagram, I started to get these opportunities to work with incredible, ethical, sustainable, small scale businesses who were really aligned with what it was that I was promoting. And so I started doing a lot of collaborations. And for a long time, and what I mean by collaborations is they would maybe send me a product, and then I would share to my audience what the product is and why it's good. And I had a very rigorous set of values when it came to who I worked with, because I really never wanted to promote any brands that didn't line up with what I was talking about. And that meant saying no to some quite big brands a lot of the time, because they actually weren't aligned with what I cared about at all. So at first, I never took any money, but then eventually, when it got bigger and the time that it took to create one post, like I was working so hard for so long just to create one post, I started creating different packages depending on the size of the brand and what they were after. And so that's where I kind of started asking myself, can you be an ethical influencer? Like, what does that look like? And so I created a bit of a guideline of that for myself.
It would have been really interesting navigating that when it was kind of pre-influencer agencies or influencer management companies as well, to kind of figure out how to price yourself, how to deliver, what sort of, I mean, I'm taking a guess here, but what sort of reporting metrics to come back to, and all of those elements.
Yeah, I was really just navigating my way through it, also by talking to a lot of other, I guess, influencers that were in the same space, which was really good, because when I started connecting with other people and learning how they made a media kit or how they charged for different content, it made it much easier for me to kind of value what I was doing. Because like a lot of creative people, I was really undercharging at the start.
That's really great that people were sharing information with you. I think a common thing that I guess takes place in the world of entrepreneurship or trying new things is we need answers to things, but we're not sure who to ask or if they will actually give us the information. So it's nice that there was a community there that was able to support you a little bit in that space.
Yeah, and a lot of these people I'm still friends with today, and some of them have gone on to do really incredible things. It's amazing because a lot of people obviously kind of bash social media, but it has connected me in real life with the most amazing people, and it has taken me literally across the world. So I've got some good things to say about it for sure.
I think that community aspect can't be denied. I mean, I'm sure it's why Zuckerberg planned this in the first instance before commercialization and all the evil kicked in. But It's nice to see it still has that outcome sometimes. Because I've been privileged enough to see a little bit about your story and chat a little bit about your story before recording this podcast, I want to get us to you moving yourself to Melbourne. So talk me through that process.
So it was one of those things where a lot happened in a very short amount of time, which I'm sure a lot of other people have experienced as well. But basically, I turned 28 and I just came to a place where I was just really finally ready to embrace who I was. And I'd been in a long-term relationship, and we both were really still very loving and respectful towards each other, but we just weren't helping each other grow anymore. And so we decided to end the relationship, which was a huge thing to do because we were engaged and we'd been together a really long time. But luckily, somehow, it was a very beautiful and mutual breakup. So we ended in a really good way, which is great. And then I found myself kind of free for the first time in a really long time. And I was living by myself, which was a whole new experience as well, but also incredibly liberating. And I decided that I wanted to finally properly come out as a queer person. It's something that I had been aware of and struggling with ever since I was a child, basically. And I had gone through a lot of years of denial and fear and shame and almost kind of coming out and then not really, and then kind of being out, but then being in a heterosexual relationship. So I had ended this relationship and I had decided to embrace who I was. And I finally came to a place where I was really ready to have a conversation with my parents. And that had been something that I had mainly been afraid of. I felt like that was really the thing that was holding me back. And then just one afternoon, I went over there and I talked to them about what the future would look like for me and how it would be very possible that the next person I brought home would be a woman. And it was the first time that I felt like they really heard me. And it was incredibly beautiful and very healing and quite emotional. And from then on, I was just like, wow, there is nothing holding me back now. I can literally do anything I want and I can go anywhere I want. And I'd always been obsessed with Melbourne and I absolutely loved it. And there wasn't really anything in Brisbane for me anymore. So I decided that 2020 was going to be my year, which in reflection is so funny. And I decided to make the move by myself and just go down there. I didn't have a job. I didn't have anywhere to live, but I just trusted that somehow it was going to work out. And I said goodbye to all of my friends and I closed all the chapters and I made the big move. And obviously the timing could have been better. However, I still don't regret it. I still absolutely love Melbourne and it was a great, great thing for me to do.
What happened when you got down to Melbourne? Where did you start?
So I started in a little share house in Northcote and it was great. It was close to everything. I really loved the area. I was able to kind of explore. And then the pandemic kind of hit. And at this time, I had just started going on a few little dates and I had just started dating this woman who was in my 5Ks and we just absolutely hit it off. And pretty quickly we had to establish that we'd be each other's bubble person. And we're still together to this day where we, have lived through obviously all of the pandemic together. So we've basically been together for 45 years at this stage. And yeah, it's just been magical. I've learned a lot about myself through this relationship. And yeah, a lot of people said they'd never seen me so happy, which I think is a really good thing to hear people say.
That's absolutely beautiful. And I just love that you were in each other's bubble. Like that's just a language or a sentence that like none of us could ever imagine would be a thing. Imagine even explaining it to future generations who aren't part of this to be like, yeah, we're in each other's 5K bubble.
Yeah, it wasn't even like, do you want to be my girlfriend? It was like, do you want to be my bubble person? That was what it was. It's just wild.
I'm glad we can almost laugh about it now. I feel like I'm like almost at the stage where it's okay to say it's somewhat over and we can laugh about it, but cautiously optimistic.
Totally.
So in terms of work at that stage, I'm guessing that you still had Unmaterial Girl happening for you. Was anything else happening for you?
Yeah, so I still always had Unmaterial Girl on the side. And that's also when I started to dabble in a little bit of TikTok, mostly as a consumer, but I did play around with doing some upcycling videos at that time and that just kept me entertained. But finding work when I first moved here, especially in and out of lockdown, was super challenging. And I actually survived off sewing masks for quite a while through my Instagram, which was really wild because I just never anticipated that my fashion degree would be so useful in the middle of a pandemic, but there we go. And I had really tried to get work with Patagonia because that was a company I'd been very passionate about. And luckily, throughout the lockdowns, I managed to get in with them, and that's who I'm still working with today. So obviously, when the stores were closed, I was out of work because my role is a visual merchandiser. So there was quite a bit of waiting, but it was actually during the waiting that I started to conceptualize and work on Radical Self. So it was born in lockdown, and it's really great to be able to start experimenting with this business out in the real world now that we're out again.
You've segued me beautifully. When did the idea for Radical Self start to seed, I guess? Was it an aha or was it a bit of a slow burn? How did that come to fruition?
So the concept for Radical Self actually started to kind of follow me around straight after my breakup. So when I was newly single, I was really searching for brands and things that were going to help me connect with myself again, help me feel really sexy and inspired. And I was just looking for tools that could really aid in my self-reflection, because I was spending a lot of time dabbling in different esoteric things, but I was constantly coming across a lot of cultural appropriation and a lot of like whitewashing and a lot of heteronormative things in that space. So there just wasn't really one shop or one business that had all of the products that I was seeking in one place. And that's when I started thinking, okay, I could do this. And it was just like when the Happy Cabin was born. It was just like the Unmaterial Girl. It's like a vision appears and it's very clear. And then it's just up to me to kind of bring it into the world. I'm a big fan of Liz Gilbert, and anyone who's read Big Magic can probably have some idea of what I'm talking about. But yeah, it was an idea that I really recognized wanted to kind of come through me. And I was pretty scared because I didn't think that I knew enough. And I also was kind of like, who am I? You know, I've never been an outwardly sexual person. So I didn't know how to talk about these things in a way that worked. But I actually think that's why it works, because I think there are a lot of other people like me who can enjoy sexuality and sensuality and pleasure. Not even like the sex part is just one component of it. There's so many other ways to access pleasure. But I think there are other people who have similar stories to me who can really relate in that way.
When I was doing my research before our chat, I came across something you said, a story that you shared about an experience that you had in a lingerie store where you were told that something was forgiving. Now, talk me through that experience.
Yeah. So like a lot of people post breakup, I was like, I want to feel good. I want to feel sexy. I'm going to buy some lingerie, like just for me, not for anyone else. I just want to feel good. And I went into a store that I won't name the name of, but I'm sure people can guess. And it's kind of really tailored lingerie and sex toys. And I just felt like the options were very much like you're either in black lace and you're like this sexy demon, or you're in the white and you're an angel. It kind of felt like it was coming through the male gaze. It didn't feel so much like it was actually for the person wearing it. It was more for the other person to experience you wearing it. I don't know. But when I was in the change room, this woman was helping me fit this bra, and she said, like, the way this sits, a lot of women really like it because it's so forgiving. And I just was like, I don't want my clothes to like be forgiving me for what? Like, that's just such a crazy concept. And it didn't leave me feeling empowered at all. And I just thought that I would love to walk into a shop where I could have a better experience, where it was actually so much more about how I felt as opposed to how I was supposed to look.
The word forgiving, I just thought, my goodness, how many times have I been described that something is forgiving, and I think, forgiven for what? Such an aha moment for me hearing that as part of your story. So Radical Self, it started to seed a potential shower idea, I guess.
Yes. Many.
I always get the best ideas when I'm in the shower, or have just woken up and I'm not near anything to write it down and not quite sure exactly what I'm thinking. So
of course.
Yes, the idea floating around, as Liz Gilbert says, it's just like, hey, oh no, I missed it. So back to you. What were your first steps in fleshing out what would become this beautiful store and this beautiful brand?
So I wrote down what my values were. I started to kind of do a lot of vision boards and put together what it was that I wanted the store to look like and what kind of words would relate to the business. And this was before I even really had a name. I was just starting to pull together music, colors, photos, textures, like feelings, anything that I thought could come into what Radical Self would be. And this is where I started learning about radical self-care and the concept of championing yourself. Ultimately, really, radical self-care is just the step before radical self-love. It's all about prioritizing yourself and your wellness and not looking at that as a selfish thing, which a lot of, I can't speak for all women, but I know a lot of women really struggle with people pleasing and boundary setting and taking care of yourself. And that was something that I'd experienced as well. And so Radical Self, I also just loved the sound of being able to uncover your radical self through the process of these beautiful tools. Like, I also always say they're not essential. There's no, that I can never sell you a product that's going to guarantee, it's going to get you there. You have all of that already. But these things are just tools. And most of them are tools that I have used that have really helped me. So I can really speak to them and I can really back them. And I spent a lot of time researching and this is what I used to do with the Happy Cabin. I would find products. I would search. I would try and find things just before they've taken off and they're really cool, and then suddenly they're at David Jones. Like, I try and find the underground ones, the ones that are just emerging, that I can really bring to a larger audience. And so I hope that that's going to work for Radical Self as well. I feel like it will, the way that it worked at the Happy Cabin.
How did it feel to launch the online store?
It was terrifying because this time it was completely self-funded. So when I did the Happy Cabin, I took out a loan in where my parents had gone guarantor because I was basically too young to be given such a chunk of money. But luckily I paid all of that off and that was completely fine. But this time I wanted to try a different method where I really started as small as I could, like minimum viable product kind of thing, test it in the smallest way. So just doing it online with the smallest quantities that I could. And then eventually, once I start seeing, okay, what's working, what's selling, I reinvest into more stock in those areas. And then I started doing little pop-ups, and now I'm doing markets and just kind of cycling everything back into the business to see what works. And I'm getting a good handle just from being out and about and talking to people and selling things in real life as to what's working.
And how is it working for you at the moment in terms of balance? So, we talked a little bit before we hit record about the challenges of making sure you're feeling financially safe when starting something new and investing your energy into a business. So talk to me about how you balance those things at the moment.
It's really hard. And I'm sure anybody that's doing the same thing would be nodding, because working a full-time job and then still finding the creative enthusiasm at the end of a day is really challenging. And so I guess I try to use as many little moments that I have to myself to keep inspired about this business. And so a lot of the work I do is on the weekends, and that's okay. That's just how it is at the moment. But also I drive a lot for my job. So when I'm driving, I'm listening to business podcasts, or I'm listening to spiritual podcasts, or if I'm on the tram in the morning, I'm finding new brands. So I try to make the time that I do have work for me. And I also try to look at my full-time job as something that's helping me achieve the dream that I actually have. And so that wasn't just me. I had to go and see a kinesiologist that really helped me reframe that, because I was really struggling with all of the energy that I was putting into my day job, but starting to try and look at it as that's just another thing that's going to help get me to where I want to go. It makes it feel more valuable again.
That's such brilliant advice to have that frame on it. I resonate completely as I balance quite a lot of things, working full time and also investing in my passions and my businesses and, the things that mean a lot to me and building those. And given that you're working at Patagonia, a place that you value and enjoy and love, but then have this other thing that you value and you enjoy and you love in, probably slightly higher weighted measures, I can understand that is an ongoing battle of how to invest yourself and how to not people please too much and how to take care of yourself first. And I think getting some support in that space to reframe how you look at things is just such valuable advice. What sort of other, guidance have you had through this stage professionally in terms of where you could take this amazing business?
I feel like it's really still just getting started. So what I'm kind of trying to do at the moment is be really strategic in where I do pop-ups, because I've found it's great having an online store and I know that it's essential. But personally, I think the magic of this business is experiencing it in real life in either a shop or a pop-up, because that's when I get to talk to people and really share what I have to give. And so being strategic with the pop-ups, I'm making sure that I go to different events where I can connect with other businesses. And I've met some incredible people through pop-ups so far. And there's such a great collaborative culture in Melbourne that I'm really just open. Originally, I was very set on just having a bricks and mortar store, which I'm not going to lie, I would still love to do that. I think it could be amazing. But I'm also open to experimenting with new forms of retail, especially after the pandemic.
Where would you like to see Radical Self build to in the future?
I would really love for it to be a brand and a business that really connects people and has something to share and can help facilitate people getting back to their radical selves, really. So whether that is through the products or whether that is through workshops or community events, I think it's kind of quite fluid as to what it can be at this point. But I know that it's going to involve connection. And I think that it can really facilitate a lot of growth for people because it already has for me.
That's so much a big part of what we create, isn't it? What it gives back to you, the individual, and what you want to see exist in this world, what sort of products or what sort of conversations that you want to have, and bringing that into the world. That's always such a beautiful place to start. Hearing your story, I can see some of the connecting dots, I guess. So imagining you even back with Unmaterial Girl and creating media kits and packages to send out to prospective clients and values, and just the energy that would have created and the knowledge that would have created, that I imagine you use now when you're approaching brands that you want to be connected with, that you want to put into the store, that you want to make part of this vision for what really speaks to you. Have those things really helped each other?
I think everything has helped. So the Happy Cabin gave me so much hands-on business and retail experience. And then the Unmaterial Girl helped me so much with content creation and photography and social media. And so all of these little things have gone into my toolkit, which is where now when I'm creating Radical Self, I've got all of those things to draw on. And I love the social media aspect and I love the photography. And this time I'm less in front of the camera. But part of me is like, maybe that's something I'll get back into eventually. But I just wanted to try it just being product focused first because I didn't want to lose myself in it, which a little bit towards the end of Unmaterial Girl, it felt like, okay, is this being run by me or is it actually running me instead? Yeah. So I just want to make sure that I have a really conscious, healthy relationship with the social media aspect of it because it's a slippery slope. I spent so much time on this. Why isn't it working?
Yeah.
Isn't it like all those kind of things? And I have to bring myself back to like, okay, at the start of Unmaterial Girl, I felt like I was speaking into the void. I was just creating content and I was so happy and I didn't care who saw it. And it was really good. And then it grew and then it was successful. And then suddenly it was like I was a slave to it in some way. I had to keep feeding the beast. Whereas now with this, I just want to make sure, like, really, it's in the name. Like I have to take radical self-care of myself through running this business. And sometimes that means I'm not posting and burning myself out late at night because that's like the whole point. That's the whole point. So we've got to change the culture around it to some degree. Like the hustle mentality is helpful maybe sometimes, but I also think we could have another look at it. There could be better ways to do it that don't involve so much self-sacrifice. Mm-hmm. And it's not a lack of work ethic. I think it's actually a prioritizing of the self, which we have to do because that's the space that we can give the best from.
That's just so very true. When you're on this journey, what scares you the most?
I'm constantly scared of failure, I say in brackets. And I guess financially, that's the thing that intimidates me. Like I said, being self-funded and what if it doesn't work? Like what if people don't get it? But so far, I haven't really experienced that. Every pop-up I've done has been really quite beneficial. I did one market that was maybe not the best and it was a little bit humbling. And I just had to remind myself that happens. Like sometimes that's part of it. It happens to literally everybody. And I learned a lot from it. And there were really no wrong turns. So actually, my biggest fear is not committing and making this happen. And playing it too safe. That's my biggest fear. Because I really think that if I give this a red hot go, it's going to work.
Those things that make us feel fear or feel shame in some way is the lack of sometimes response that comes back. So put something out into socials, nothing comes back, quote unquote, nothing. Maybe not, expectations aren't met in what comes back. Try something at a pop-up, expectations are not quite met about what comes back. It's usually something outside of ourselves that we're banking that success on, what other people do or respond to the thing that you're putting out. But it's so wonderfully inspiring to hear you say that, I went out and I learned something from it. And yeah, it sucked a little bit, but I learned something from it. Yeah, that, that content might not have landed, but I learned something from it. I just think that's so important. It's not necessarily about what the response is. It's about how it feels in our body and what it teaches us and how it moves us forward on the journey. So I think that's very interesting. Leah, I'm so excited for you. It really feels like you've got something really wonderful here. And I think just the whole aspect of that radical self-care, self-pleasure, just putting your joy first in whatever that looks like for you is a really inspiring cause to be behind, to be creating a business from. And it's a great message to be putting out into the world. So thank you for creating it.
Thank you. That's really nice to hear. I appreciate that.
Before we let you go, tell me, how can the listener and I support you on your journey and what you're creating at the moment?
I guess following along on Instagram. So my Instagram is @radicalselfstore would be a really nice place to start, because that's kind of where the action is at the moment. And then I've also got my online store, which is radicalself.com.au, and all of my products are for sale there. And just keeping an eye out, if you're in Melbourne, come along to a pop-up and try some things, smell some things, taste some things. Like, it's a very good real life experience, this shop. So that would be what I would say.
And what are you going to do for yourself this afternoon? It's going to prioritize your self-care.
Well, I've already had some incense going, and I did a little tarot reading for myself before.
Cool.
And I've had some tea, and now I'm going to go and meet up with some friends who I met at a pop-up, and we're going to have some beers in the sun with our little puppy. So it's going to be a good one.
That sounds absolutely glorious. Well, I'm so grateful that you spent some time with me today to share your incredible story, and I wish you nothing but the best of luck on the journey. I know that we'll be hearing more and more about it as you grow.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Unemployed and Afraid, the stories of starting over with your host, me, Kim Curtin. If you liked the episode and are keen to hear more, please hit the follow button and leave a review. And let's keep the conversation going on Instagram @unemployedandafraid, where there's more goodies and links to today's show notes. See you there.